I would like to extend a warm welcome to all members of the Environment and Sustainability Overview and Scrutiny Panel, officers and members of the public in attendance at today's meeting of the 17th of June 2021. Welcome to members of the public and press who may be listening to the meeting live on YouTube. I am Councillor Sue Bennison, Vice Chairman of the Environment and Sustainability Overview and Scrutiny Panel. However, I am Chairman of the panel today as Councillor Rippon-Swain is unable to attend the meeting. Please note that the audio of this meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's website and on YouTube. It will remain available for a minimum of 12 months. I would remind those in attendance to use your microphone when speaking and remember to switch it off once you had finished speaking. Please switch any mobile devices to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. For the benefit of those listening to the meeting online, I will now call the name of each panel member and ask them to introduce themselves. As I previously mentioned, I am Councillor Sue Bennison, Chair of the meeting today. Councillor Anne Bellows.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Alan Glass.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Andrew Gossage.
Present, Madam Chair.
Councillor Tony Ring.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Derek Tipp.
Present, Chair.
And Councillor Malcolm Wade.
Good afternoon and present, Chairman.
Thank you. Apologies. Obviously, we've had apologies for Councillor Rippon-Swain. Also apologies from Councillor Jeff Blunden and from Councillor Stephanie Osborne. Turning to the agenda, minutes. Can we approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of March and the 5th of May? Everybody okay with those minutes? Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have an interest they wish to declare? No. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Councillor Wade.
Chairman, just a sort of, it's not really, it is personal. I'm a county councillor, so in the waste report, you will be talking about the disposal authority, which is the county council. That's all. There's nothing particularly to worry about in that. I thought I'd just mention that.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Wade. Public participation, there is none. Terms of reference. Members, you will see that the terms of reference are slightly changed because of the change of the portfolio holders. Just to note, already approved by the Council. On to, sorry, Councillor Wade.
Yeah, Chairman, I'm sorry to sort of interrupt you on this, but as we've changed the portfolio holder, I was a bit disappointed to see that this council hasn't followed the route of very many other councils by putting someone responsible for working against climate change. It doesn't appear here at all. And being that we are such a sensitive district environmentally, I would have thought that this would be something that we would do. And I would request that the portfolio holders go away and look at this and bring back a terms of reference that does include it, because climate change is one of the biggest challenges that will face us, particularly in this environmentally sensitive district. And for this council not to do it, I think is doing a disservice to the people in New Forest. And so many other councils, including the county council, yeah, a bit of an interest there, I suppose, have recognised that climate change is serious. I think we should do the same, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in response to Councillor Wade, I'd just like to make perhaps an alternative view in that I think the environment is a core factor in everything that we do, and that if we make climate change and so on a stovepipe, an individual factor to consider, we risk losing, perhaps not putting it into everything that we're considering. And so therefore there is no need to look at it from a climate change point of view, but simply as a core factor in everything we address. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Gossage. In fact, I was going to say a similar thing. It is referred to in all our task and finish groups and our meetings. Sorry, Councillor Wade, you'd like to come back?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. Well, if Councillor Gossage's view is the official view of this administration, you ought to really say that, because either you're dealing with climate change, you recognise it's important, or you don't. Now, if that's the official view of this administration, I'm sure the people of New Forest will be pleased, be interested to hear that. So I ask you again, I do accept that's your opinion. It is an important factor. It's a factor that affects the planet, this nation. Even the government recognises they need to do things about climate change. So this council should not be out of step with everybody else. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Glass.
Thank you. I think this should go in the diary. I agree with Councillor Wade. I've known him for years. We don't very often agree. But although it is all part of the environment overview and everything else, I think to give someone a tag to sort of make sure we keep an eye on it and to chase up when something isn't being done, I think that's a good idea as part of this group. Give someone or some small committee the opportunity to look after it. I'd certainly be willing to serve on that panel because I believe that it is something that a lot of people are looking at now. It does always take an overview because we can take a look at everything else. And if we're thinking of changing cars or changing whatever, we always look at fuel. But we can just say, well, this group have looked at it as well, and it will keep the public informed that we are concentrating on environment within our environmental remit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Yes, Councillor Tipp.
Just like to say that I support Councillor Gossage. I don't see, I mean, we've already got this in the council's constitution going forward anyway, so I don't see any necessity to repeat it here.
Would the portfolio holder like to comment?
I've always got a comment, Chairman, thank you. Well, yeah, I certainly agree with all the comments made. Climate change is happening. It's something we need to be carefully managing. And in my role, working with the areas that I'm currently accountable for, we are certainly very cognizant of the changes to our coastline, the need to recycle more, and even to protect our coastlines. Things are happening. It's part of climate change. It's been happening for many years and it will continue to happen. And it's something that we all take very seriously, and you'll see that factored into every report I make.
Councillor Wade.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, well, that's very reassuring to hear that, and I have no doubt that the point she's making are true. But we should really have it in here somewhere, shouldn't we? Because not mentioning it at all doesn't really send the right message. And I'm actually doing this to help you, trying to give you a direction where this authority should be going. And by not mentioning it in the terms of reference of the committee that's called Environment and Sustainability Overview, really, you're missing one of the biggest challenges the world is going to face. And I accept that not everybody views this the same as I do and the majority of the planet, but it is an important issue. And not mention it anywhere in the documents such as this is doing a disservice to the people that are working on it and to the people in Forest who believe it is a priority.
I think it's something that cuts across all these areas. I don't think it's something that needs to be specified as a separate issue because it cuts across each of these areas that we're looking at, and therefore is constantly being looked at and reviewed. Would the panel members agree with that statement? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Wade. Item Agenda 5, Portfolio Holders Reports. We are missing Councillor Heron and Councillor Andrews at the moment, so Councillor Davies, would you like to make your report to us?
Thank you, Chair. I'd love to. The past 2 months have been a significant learning opportunity for me, as you can imagine, and I can only thank the officers of the waste and transport teams, the coastal and parking teams for their support and incredible patience. Much appreciated. I promise I won't make too many cock-ups. Waste collection. There are 3 significant chunks I want to talk about, Chair. Waste collection, coastal and car parks. They're the 3 large circles of the Venn diagram, I think, of the portfolio. The waste collection strategy continues to be refined and enhanced, and the most recent government consultations on deposit return schemes, DRS, extended producer responsibility, EPR, and waste prevention have been studied and responses submitted. Our responses to the consistency in collections will be made today after the panel meeting. Next month, I'll be attending my first Project Integra board, which is, of course, the Hampshire-wide project board, and I'll be also visiting depots and hopefully the MRF to get a good feel for the operational side of the division. There's a lot of change happening in this area, and it's something that I think is very exciting, with great opportunities for all of us. On the coastal side, I visited the Milford Phase 1 site, the Westover Urgent Works, as I was reminded a short time ago, with Claire and Steve and Pete from the coastal team. The plans for the next phases are to be firmed up along with the FCERM, Strategy for Christchurch Bay, FCERM, which is Flooding, Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy for Christchurch Bay, that is being led by BCP and with whom we are now partnering. The significance of the Christchurch Bay strategy is that we cannot plan for the future alone. And there will be a number of Coastal Council briefings throughout the next few weeks, followed by a public consultation. Future funding requests to the EA based on a detailed strategy are quite frankly more likely to be successful as opposed to going it alone. On the 21st, Claire and I will join a tour of the NFDC coast sites with our new coastal team and our new BCP team buddies. So that starts at Milford next week. On the Milford front, the beach recharge will also take place next month, which is a massive cost to the budget, but it's something we have to do every now and then. I attended a presentation of the Hurst Tracer project by Coastal Partners, which confirmed what we always knew about longshore drift, but now we know the scale of the shingle movement towards the east, which is quite stunning. In fact, I was quite surprised to learn that one of the traced pebbles actually moved over 1,000 meters in the 18-month period. That just shows the extent, I think, of our challenge. Quite where that will end up remains to be seen. That's a further study. Finally, and I almost forgot to include this, the Keyhaven project is complete, and Keyhaven and the other coastal car parks are, of course, very busy now, but manageable. With regard to car parks, I visited Totton. David Russell was the tour guide, and also Fordingbridge, where I met with David Hurd, the parking enforcement officer. I was keen to see how we support EV charging points and how we meet the need for more long-term car parking spaces. Both are available at Fordingbridge, and in response to local needs, we've increased the availability of the long-term spaces, which I think was well received by the town recently. At present, we have EVCPs, these are electric vehicle charging points, in 9 of our car parks, but Lyndhurst is coming on stream later this year, so that'll make it 10. But why slow down now? A survey will be carried out to assess all our remaining amenity car parks to see how quickly we can install more charging points. I'm keen to follow up on the recommendations of the Off-Street Parking Strategy Working Group, which finally met last year, especially with regard to moving to a cashless service and using maybe a discounted tariff card was mentioned to replace the clocks. Blue badge parking will of course remain free, but will now be formally limited to 4 hours or 20 hours for those who have a long stay clock. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Panel members, do you have any questions? No?
Not even from you, Malcolm. Good heavens.
Well, I don't have a question, but I'd just like to make a comment. You mentioned about the tracing pebbles. I find that quite fascinating that they can put these little tracing pebbles down and watch how the current moves them. And did you say 1,000 miles?
The 1,000 metres.
1,000 metres,
Just over a
sorry.
kilometre. Yeah,
I thought 1,000 miles was a long time.
what was quite fascinating is that they loaded up, I forget how many it was, I think it's about 300, was it Claire? I can't remember, about 300 with these minute sensors that they could scan with electronic devices walking up and down the beach. Quite a few of them had jumped over the groins at Milford.
Really?
Just shows how heavy the storms were. And most had moved around about 300 or 400 metres, but there was one in particular, one must have been a flying pebble that moved over 1,000 metres, almost towards Hurst Castle.
Gosh.
So the question is, going forward, is where do they go after that? Because I suspect they'll go onto a shingle bank under the water, but close to the Needles. If that's the case, that's where perhaps we should get our recharged pebbles from in future to save having to buy them from somewhere else. But again, that's a further study that's going to take place and look at that. But it's all quite fascinating.
And how far can they actually trace them? If they get to a certain distance, are they untraceable?
Until they lose sight of them. But they could reappear
I
anywhere,
see.
but until they lose sight of them, apparently. So that one that's travelled the 1,134 metres, I think it was, that one will probably disappear at some stage. But they might now start to track them underwater as well if we go with a new survey, just to see where, in fact, they do actually go
So
after Hurst Castle.
They could do that, track them underwater, could they?
They have the capability. Coastal partners have all sorts of gizmos, and they have boats with sensors on, but that will require additional funding from the EA to make that happen.
Yeah, very interesting. Councillor Tipp.
Just one question on that. Does the councillor know what size these pebbles were?
No.
Thank you, Councillor Tipp.
Just announce apologies from Councillor Andrews because she's not here and she's got her apologies.
Thank you. Evidently, we received apologies from Councillor Andrews, who has been held up, and Councillor Heron hasn't arrived, but if he does arrive, we could go back to him. So we'll move on now to item 6, which is the annual performance and provisional budget outturn. Rebecca Drummond, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So if I can give you a brief overview of the report. So this item presents the annual performance and provisional budget outturn for the year 2020-21. So just to emphasise, the backward-looking report reflecting the financial performance and progress against the delivery of the corporate plan, community matters by portfolio for the last financial year. The COVID-19 pandemic understandably dominated this performance, and this is highlighted throughout the papers. As it's a backward-looking report, it doesn't reflect the most recent changes to portfolio, but does recognise the need to revisit the corporate plan to make sure that the priorities are still appropriate in light of the impact of COVID-19, and also to reflect the new priorities of the portfolio changes. Following this, and the panel will be familiar with the portfolio dashboards that have been coming here more recently, we'll review the portfolio dashboards and align them with any revisions to the corporate plan and continue to bring them to the panel. So the report also provides the provisional budget outturn position previously presented to Cabinet in April. The statutory statement of accounts will be completed by the 30th of September, and any significant variations from this position will be reported. So if I can take you to the annual performance position statement, Appendix 1, which I think is page 9 of the report. So the position statement aims to report on the delivery of the corporate plan, which members will recall was approved by Cabinet in March 2020, just ahead of the first lockdown. So understandably, performance during the year was dominated by the pandemic, and the position statement acknowledges the significant impact of COVID-19 on service delivery during the year. It also identifies the necessary portfolio response to the pandemic. So taking you through the document, I draw your attention to the performance summary key on page 11. So an assessment of the performance of key service areas within each portfolio is undertaken and is shown against the portfolio's performance on the main portfolio pages. So this assessment considers 3 aspects. So staffing availability, factoring in absences as a direct result of COVID-19, including shielding, self-isolation, and where staff were redeployed onto other activities, the budget impact in respect of costs and income, and the overall impact on service delivery to the public. Those services that were significantly impacted are further marked with an asterisk. I'd also draw your attention to page 13, which summarises the response to the pandemic across the council, illustrating how much the council delivered during this time. So focusing specifically on the portfolios relevant to this panel, page 15 summarises the impacts and some of the achievements for the planning and infrastructure portfolio. So a few things to mention, and it's worth just highlighting that, again, this is backward looking. So this is reflecting of the performance of the portfolios as they were during 2020-2021. So a few things to mention: building control and planning services continued to be delivered throughout the pandemic, which included a move to virtual planning committee meetings. The pre-application service was redesigned to include a virtual duty officer service. The number of planning applications received was comparable to those received in 2019-20. The building control market share fell initially, but then recovered with a 9% increase from January 2019 to January 2020. Green infrastructure projects were delivered, including those at Swetford Water and at Poorna Lakes. Car park charges were suspended initially, and usage was impacted throughout the year as a result of further lockdowns and national restrictions. The portfolio lost revenue of approximately £1 million as a result of this. The parking team were redeployed in part to support delivery of the food parcels to individuals across the area. So page 22 then summarises the impacts and achievements of the Environment and Regulatory Services portfolio, again reflecting the previous portfolio structure. A few things to mention here. Despite the pandemic, waste and recycling maintained weekly collections with a 9% increase in household waste collected compared to the previous year. The portfolio also saw a 28% increase in garden waste customers, an additional 4,437 sign-ups to this service. The Krabby campaign was introduced and helped in delivering 29% reduction in rubbish collections with a saving of £10,000. Unfortunately, fly tipping increased by 28% and 17 fixed penalty notices were issued during the year. As a response to the pandemic, cleaning activities at public conveniences were introduced to help minimise the spread of the virus. The environmental health team was significantly impacted and diverted from their normal functions to support the COVID-19 response. Over 1,100 COVID-related service requests were dealt with, 300 new businesses were set up, and over 137 visits undertaken to food retailers and other premises to ensure COVID safety and compliance. Urgent work to repair and damage to the Westover Cliff seawall at Milford-on-Sea commenced in August 2020, as the portfolio holder mentioned. Appendix 2 of the document details the financial outturn position. Again, just to highlight a couple of things that are relevant to this panel. So although there was a slow first quarter of the year, planning activity picked up and income in planning application fees ended up exceeding the original targets for the year. Parking income was impacted, as previously mentioned, especially within the town and village centres. Income within the environment portfolio was reduced, namely in trade waste collections, although garden waste income grew to help compensate. Expenditure was increased as a result of social distancing measures introduced within vehicles and the cleaning regime of the council's public conveniences. These costs being covered by the central government support grant. And I'm happy to move to any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rebecca. Panel members, any questions? Yes, Councillor Wade.
Sorry, it's just much more about fly tipping. I noticed there's a huge increase in fly tipping. I wonder, it may be something that perhaps Colin would answer this is, do you know why this has happened during the pandemic when everybody was locked down? For most of the time, the Hampshire County Council waste sites have been open. Is it due to the fact that an increase in the charges that have caused this, or is there some other reason? Because it's quite a significant increase in the report. I just wondered if you've got any comment why it's got such a bigger problem. If it's more like a Colin question, isn't it?
Thank you, Councillor Wade. Yeah. So initially, you're correct. The household waste recycling centres were closed, yeah. And we could see a correlation between the fact that they were closed and the amount of fly tipping. We're also conscious that a number of people had a lot more time on their hand, were clearing out their houses, their garages, everything else. And also, some of the fly tipping data that we were using, it was people actually putting rubbish alongside recycling bins. So not actually tipping it on the side of the road, but putting it in the bring sites, which technically is fly tipping. And that's another big reason actually why there was an increase. But you are correct, there is a definite increase. Some people don't like the booking system that Hampshire have implemented for their house and waste recycling centres, and certainly in sites such as Lymington, found it quite difficult to book time slots. I think Marchwood and Summerley were a lot easier to book time slots in, but Lymington, there definitely was an issue of capacity and people being able to book. Also, a bit of people not being aware that they had to book, so being turned away by the county at these sites and not wanting them to take the material back home with them. So I think there was no one reason, but there was a number of reasons why fly tipping. But I'm also going to say it was a national problem. So not only were New Forest suffering from an increase in fly tipping, we saw that nationally right across the country, that very much a correlation between the lockdowns and fly tipping incidents.
Councillor Glass.
Thank you. I was glad to hear that Colin mentioned the booking of appointments to go in and tip at Marchwood. A lot of the people I've spoken to think it's a great idea. Instead of, as you used to do, queuing up and waiting half a Sunday morning to get in a crowded place, you turn up now, you give your name, you go in, and they'll just direct you straight to a spot. You're in, tip, out. I'm very much hoping that they carry on booking spaces like that, because now people have got used to it. It's quicker, easier, and in fact cleaner. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in fact, Councillor Gossett. I was just going to say, I think in fact, as far as the Marchwood site is concerned, I did have a couple of phone calls from residents saying they had some difficulty in the booking system, but I think that was just a hitch, that something went a little bit wrong, which caused a little bit of anguish. But certainly on the odd occasions that I've driven past there's never been any queues, and it has looked really quite quiet there. So I think possibly the booking system does work, as long as it's actually working on the day. Councillor Gossage.
Madam Chair, thank you. And thank you for the report and the summary of what we've just heard. I just think this emphasises the remarkable effort that the council officers have undertaken in the last 18 months, really, in terms of coping with the burden of COVID and the restrictions and the difficulties that brings, and also maintaining normal service. And it's been remarkable, and I just think we should thank council officers, top to bottom,
Yes.
for the efforts that have been undertaken. Tremendous. Thank you.
Indeed, Councillor Gossage, I would echo that. I think our staff and our officers have done a huge, magnificent job during this very difficult COVID period that we've all had to live through. Any more questions for Rebecca? No. So we will move on now to item 7, the waste strategy update, DEFRA waste consultations. And Chris, I think this is over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm just going to run through the key elements of the report that was obviously circulated along with the agenda for this meeting. So just to sort of cast minds back and a little bit of a recap as to how we got to where we are. Government began reviewing the National Waste Strategy in 2018, and that was followed in 2019 with some national consultations on different elements of the National Waste Strategy, which this council responded to, and partly because of that and partly due to other reasons decided that we needed to review our own waste strategy and set up a member working group to lead the council through that process. That culminated in a draft waste strategy being developed and some engagement activity carried out on that strategy, and government are now consulting again on 4 areas which are detailed within the report. So deposit return schemes, or DRS, This is a scheme whereby a deposit amount is added to the cost of a drinks container when purchased by a consumer. The consumer can then redeem that deposit upon returning it to a shop or other depository for recycling and get the deposit back on that item. That's seen as an incentive for those items to be recycled. In terms of the council's response to that, we have responded to that consultation already in consultation with the Task and Finish group and the portfolio holder. The key elements of our response to that have been supportive of the on-the-go element of deposit return schemes, which is targeting smaller drinks containers in an attempt to reduce the amount of litter. But overall, a theme of our response has been to urge government to consider delaying the introduction of a deposit return scheme until other measures, which I'll come on to in a moment, have been put into place, had chance to bed in, to see if they can deliver some of the improvements that we would like to see in waste and recycling nationally. So that's been a theme within our response on deposit return schemes. On extended producer responsibility, this is a scheme whereby funding makes its way to the likes of NFDC and other authorities with the responsibility for dealing with waste from the packaging industry. So packaging manufacturers and retailers putting money into the pot for distribution to those who are bearing the cost of dealing with packaging waste. This is designed to encourage packaging producers to reduce or redesign their packaging and improve its recyclability. Our response to that has been positive. Our response has also drawn attention to the need to make sure that those payments are reflective of local costs for local councils. So all councils across the country are different. Our costs for dealing with packaging waste vary across those councils, and we need to make sure that whatever model is put into place to distribute the funding is fair and equitable to all councils. On waste prevention, we've also responded to that consultation. That's the third of 4, and this is very much about dealing with waste at the top of the waste hierarchy. So before we consider recycling, recovering or disposing of waste, we should be thinking about preventing and reusing waste items, because that's the best option environmentally and in most cases financially as well for local authorities and wider society. Our response to that has suggested to government that we feel they could be more ambitious in their waste prevention measures. It does seem to have been the poorer relation of some of the other consultations that government have put out. The fact that it sits at the top of the waste hierarchy means that it should be the priority for us going forward and for national government, and we've tried to reflect that in our response to that consultation. The fourth consultation, which is probably the one with most direct impact upon NFDC and indeed all waste collection authorities, hasn't yet been submitted. It's due to be submitted in early July, so the panel has a chance today to sort of influence the council's response to that, which is one of the recommendations at the end of the report. It's about government aiming to get more consistency across the country in what's collected for recycling and how it's collected, with the aim of improving recycling in terms of quantity of recycling, but also improving the quality of the recyclable material that's collected across the country. Some key proposals and our response to those within our response that we are working on at the moment and that we've discussed with the Task and Finish group that's been looking into this. Government would like us to collect more types of recycling, including plastic pot stubs and trays, plastic film and aluminium foil. We are largely supportive of that. It largely fits with our preferred option that I've mentioned previously. We will express some reservations around timescales in our response to that, because we are dependent upon infrastructure being in place before we can collect that material. It needs to have somewhere to go to be sorted and to be reprocessed, and some of that is beyond our control. With regard to separate collection, government are keen for recyclable material streams to be collected separately where at all possible. Our view is that some materials can be mixed together and still have the quality of those items maintained. For example, glass, metal and plastic we feel is an acceptable material mix to collect as one waste stream, and we shall make that point in our response. Food waste, government are going to legislate for food waste to be collected weekly and separately for all English local authorities. Currently only about half of English authorities collect food waste separately, so there are lots of authorities that are going to be gearing up for this. Our overall response is supportive of the principle of food waste collections, but again will reflect some concerns around timescales and also funding. Government has said that through new burdens funding, councils will receive the funding to introduce services such as separate weekly food waste. We have some questions about longevity and scope of that funding that we'll express through our response to the consultation. And finally, on consistency, garden waste There is a proposal in the consultation from government that garden waste collections should be provided free of charge. And when I say free of charge, that's free up to a point, so up to 240 litres per fortnight, and during the growing season only. Beyond that, councils would maintain the ability to charge for garden waste collection over 240 litres and in months that are not considered to be part of the growing season. Our position on that is that we would, so far in consultation with the Task and Finish group, oppose that measure. We don't feel it encourages things like home composting and other ways of dealing with garden waste that would be considered to be more environmentally friendly. We don't necessarily feel that it's a necessary scheme to introduce free of charge. Garden waste makes up a very small proportion of residual waste across Hampshire, and actually we do quite well at capturing it through our current chargeable service. Stakeholder engagement is also included in the report. We have presented to the panel the headline results of the stakeholder engagement we did at the end of 2020 calendar year. And that information is included in the report as well. Just under 4,000 responses from the public and also responses from other stakeholders. And some of the key results of that are included in section 4.2 of the report. Those results will form a key part of the Task and Finish group's work over the coming months as we move towards the next stage of decision making around waste strategy. Finally, two key points here just with regard to work that's ongoing with the County Council. County Council are our waste disposal authority, so they are responsible for dealing with waste once we've collected it and delivered it to them. So we have to work very closely with them on any future service changes that we may look to make. County have, along with the districts, carried out some modelling of collection systems across the rest of the county, and the model of collection that comes out with the best environmental and cost result across the county matches with the council's preferred option that we asked for views on as part of our engagement process last year, which is encouraging because we seem to be heading in the same direction as the rest of Hampshire. And secondly, more work will be going on in the next few months with the County Council on infrastructure and the plans for introducing that so that we can carry out the collection changes that we'll need to make, and also the partnership agreements. So what is the working relationship going to be between the districts and the County Council as Waste Disposal Authority in terms of responsibility, funding, decision making, governance and other elements like that. So if I'll conclude there. The key recommendation I think in the report is to ask the panel for feedback in particular on some of the measures in the consistency consultation, because as I said, we have a couple more weeks to finalise our response to that. So I'd welcome the views of the panel, but that's all I have to say, Chair, for now.
Thank you, Chris. Panel members, any questions, any comments you would like to make? Councillor Glass.
Just a slightly odd one, really. I wondered if ever we had any recyclable wood handed in, because things like pallets, I wonder if there was a way of disposing with those easily, because they're not always collected by the people that supply them. And I know there's quite a few people looking for them.
Yes.
Yeah, probably the key disposal method for that is through a household waste recycling centre run by the County Council. They have various outlets for wood waste. Some of it goes for energy recovery, but obviously in quite a high energy recovery sort of facility that generates electricity, like a biofuel type facility. There are also some recycling outlets for wood waste, so it doesn't end up in landfill if it goes through that household waste recycling centre. So that's probably the best option for residents if they have those one-off sort of wood items. Thank you. Okay.
Councillor Tipp.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Listening to all of this, I mean, one of the things that strikes me is that manufacturers and retailers would not put in my opinion, any extra packaging other than what they believe is necessary to sell the product and to keep it in good condition and so on. Because, of course, there's a cost. There is an initial cost, isn't there? I mean, you've got to buy the packaging material. Of course, if they can save a bit on that, they would do so. So I'm opposed to increasing taxes on these retailers and manufacturers, because all it's going to do, they're going to pass those costs on to us, the consumers. And things are already expensive. And I think that we've got to look at an alternative method than to simply raise taxes still higher. So I do hope that that figures in some of the responses. I mean, these responses are actually available for individuals, and I've responded to these as an individual and read them through, but I don't know whether many of the public actually know about them. I rather think not many, and that's a shame really, because I think they are going to pay for it at the end.
Thank you, Councillor Tipp. Any other comment? I'll go to Councillor Wade and then I'll... Thank you, Councillor Wade.
Yeah, John, I've got a different question actually. I heard today in another presentation in another place that the government were going to respond to the consultations right to the end of the year. You may or may not be aware of that. How will that affect the timeline for the changes that we propose to bring in? Is it going to, or can we manage that successfully? Because 2023 is moving inexorably closer.
Yeah, I think I was possibly hoping for a government response to be a little bit earlier than the end of the year, possibly in the sort of autumn or after the summer period. But it may well be that it comes towards the end of the calendar year. Yeah, I think there's going to be several things sort of coming to a head. I think the work with Hampshire and other partners across the county is progressing now, and we're looking to try and come to some sort of agreement about the way forward during the autumn with our county partners. So we'll have to see what that government timeline is looking like. I think there are certain things within the consultation documents that are very clear and actually that are being legislated for through the Environment Bill already, which is going through government at the moment. So the best example of that is food waste collection. That's going through in the Environment Bill and will be legislated for in that way. So it's quite clear that that is going to be something that we have to do. There will be other elements, for example, garden waste, the garden waste collection service, and whether or not we are permitted to charge for that in the future or not, that we may have to wait until later in the year to find. So it will be a balancing act in terms of when we have to make our decision making, what do we know and what can we make sort of cast iron decisions on, and what don't we know? And I think we'll know what we don't know, if that makes sense. I think we'll know what those things are that still have to be tied up. But you're quite correct in that 2023, 24, when some of these measures start to come in, isn't that far away in terms of planning for significant service change. And that won't just apply to us, you know, that's all authorities across the country, and we will have to look to make some decisions at some point.
Councillor Davies and then Councillor Gossage.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say that what I've noticed over the past couple of years is that in fact, it's the consumer that is starting to push the change in certain places. Morrison's announced this morning milk in glass bottles. They might be more expensive, but it is a way of making you feel good, like I do in the morning when I use my glass bottle of my cornflakes. But I've noticed even in the farm shop, you know, they offer a choice of plastic bag or paper bag when you get your stuff. And what I've noticed now is that the plastic bags are just not being used. They're still hanging on the roll, but everyone's going for the paper bags. It is consumer demand. People will push businesses to change their packing and their packaging. I firmly believe that. The government is right, though, just to encourage them along, I think, a little bit with EPR. Without wanting to burnish my environmental credentials, I would say that I did do what Monty Don suggested 3 or 4 years ago and acquired some unwanted old packing crates and made an even bigger compost heap at the end of my garden. So, you know, rather than go to earth or to landfill, they've been reborn in my garden. I'm very proud of that.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Any more comments? Yes. Oh, yes, Councillor Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly, the phrase comes to mind, where there's muck, there's brass. The trouble is it works the wrong way round in that waste management costs money rather than necessarily making money across the country. Some individuals, no doubt, will make some money out of it. And so I think we do need to see the central government funding assured for us to run schemes like the food waste recycling and so on. And it strikes me that waste management does cost money, but poor waste management costs the planet, coming back to climate change management and environmental factors. And I'm glad to see, and thank you for the report, Chris. It's very interesting to read, and I agree with all of it. In particular, I do think that actually costs lie where they fall in respect of collection of garden waste, in that if people choose to use the service which is kindly offered by the council, then it's a service that would be appropriate to be paid for, rather than laying that charge across the community in terms of collecting it through council tax. So that particular point in the report I do agree with. And last point, going back to Councillor Davis' point, it strikes me that we're going back pre-1970s, when one used to have to pay your deposit on your Corona bottle or whatever it was, and other issues like that, that we took for granted when plastics became freely available in the 1970s, and we just assumed that we would buy something and throw away the wrapper, container, or what it was. Those were the days of untold luxury in terms of not having to worry about the planet. But now we are being brought back into reality, and I hope it continues and we get to improve. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Gossage, I think that was the days of the throwaway society that we were. And just on Councillor Davis's comment, yes, I've noticed that Morrison's now do not even provide plastic bags, they are paper. And in fact, at Asda, I bought 3 little netting bags in which to put loose vegetables or things of that nature. So you just reused your netting bag, which I take back and use it again. So I think the public will drive this into not having so much packaging around their stuff. And that's where the extender producer responsibility may put some pressure on them to alter the way they package things that arrive on our supermarket shelves. I, for one, certainly hope so. Thank you very much for the report. If no more comments, I think, have you got enough feedback to take forward on the constituency? Thank you very much. So, if everybody's happy, we will move on to item 8, the Green Infrastructure Strategy. And Louise, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This report is brought to you to mark actually the commencement of an important bit of work which was identified in a report to Cabinet in May about the need for a green infrastructure strategy for the district to help us deliver on a whole host of environmental issues that we need to address as part of not only our planning agenda, but also the wider agenda of achieving sustainable development and delivering, working towards net near zero carbon economy and addressing climate change issues, and also helping protect the natural environment. It very much links into work that's coming out of government in the Environment Bill, which has already been referred to, that talks about achieving biodiversity net gain as part of development, and the desire for nature recovery, setting targets to address a decline in the natural world. Green infrastructure also has a very important potential for carbon capture and storage. So, for example, the planting of woodland and the creation of wetlands very much helps capture carbon in the environment and addresses the issues associated with that. And also, green infrastructure has an important role in mitigating the impacts of development and climate change, cooling the air, protecting water quality, helping us to address in some ways flooding and issues of sea level rise. So that there is a very broad scope of environmental issues that green infrastructure can help us deliver on. So in the report, we outlined for you the type of things that we think a green infrastructure strategy for the district will look at. It emphasises the potential of taking a wider view of a lot of these issues, and the value that can be gained as looking at it as a total package rather than delivering certain things in isolation. the report also highlights is that the benefits to the health and well-being of the community actually associated with providing good quality green infrastructure. And I think we've all learnt through the last 18 months the increased value that the natural world and access to green spaces and nature have had on the health and well-being of our communities. So, as I say, the report just sets out in very broad terms the type of policy areas we'll be looking at, and I'd welcome further comments on what we have identified as a starting point. Certainly by the conversation today, I know a lot of members are very much interested in these types of issues. So we're suggesting that a member workshop be held as soon as possible, which looks like being towards the end of July, to give members an opportunity to input their ideas on these topics. If you like a sort of workshop brainstorming session to generate ideas before your officers move too far forward in progressing work. So that's the recommendation, and we'd very much welcome the panel's views on that approach.
Thank you, Louise. Just before I go to panel members, anything you would like to add? Shoot.
No, Chair, I think Louise has covered this well, but just to re-emphasise the importance we believe green infrastructure plays within our overall environment and economy.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. I think this is an extremely important strategy that we ought to get right. So I open it to panel members. Yes, Councillor Tipp.
There's one thing in the report that is missing, and that is at the end of the report under financial implications. It says no direct immediate implications, but there must be implications, as to who is going to pay for it, and how much is it going to cost. I don't know at what stage will those financial implications be known.
Can I maybe pick that on? That is one of the real reasons for us wanting to do a green infrastructure, so that we set out our vision for our district of what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to go about achieving it. We have already experienced funding bids that have come out, whereas as a council, because we don't have a strategy and a clear vision, we've not been able to put forward a bid. We're certain that going forward, as the government puts more emphasis on its green recovery, that there will be more opportunities to look at funding streams, and therefore this strategy will play a key role in actually setting out projects and what we're trying to achieve. We've also, as the planning authority, requiring developers at the moment to achieve biodiversity net gain in advance of the Environment Bill. So we're sort of leading the way in terms of biodiversity net gain at a national level. What we're experiencing, some sites it's more difficult than others. And again, if we look at opportunities for delivering some of that biodiversity net gain in a different way, we can collect contributions and actually contribute towards that. So I'm not going to go through the long list that I could go through in terms of the opportunities, but I just want to really emphasise to the panel, part of the reason for having that strategy is having a document where we can set out what we're trying to achieve that will enable us to look at different sources of funding. The document in itself won't cost any money other than officers' time to produce.
So will the onus be on the developer to fund this, or the government? Or are we dependent upon those sources of funding for it to actually take place? What we're setting out is a wish list, really, that we're hoping to be funded. Is that, am I right?
So we're setting out a strategy so that we as a council have a clear, agreed position on the art of the possible, and that's in the strategy. There will be different funding opportunities, and we will be able to confidently go forward at short notice, because these bids, national bids that come out from government are always, you've got 10 days to fill in your bid application, off you go. If you haven't got the projects, you're not even in the game before it starts. That's it.
Okay, Councillor Tip. Councillor Glass.
Thank you. I was just going to come up with something that's happening at Fawley at the moment on a very similar idea, where they're building at Calshot, we have to mitigate the open space. So Fawley happened to have a golf course that was no longer viable because it was firstly too close to the road, and you couldn't build on it because it was in the hazard zone for ESO. So it's becoming a dog walking area. A lot of this is being paid by developers' contributions. So it's doing several jobs. It's giving open space, it's giving an area for dogs to walk with their owners separately to the playing fields, where they're not encouraged. But it's also something that is going to have minimal cost to the council. So I think that's the sort of scheme we're looking at. And if so, it's a win-win as far as I can see. Thank you.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's quite a good report. You're looking at the green issues, as you should do. I heard the phrase climate change mentioned at least twice by the office, and it's written in here, because that's why you're doing it. The problem is, until you admit there's a problem, you're never going to deal with a solution. There are lots of strategies for doing this. They don't all cost money. Some of them there will be a cost, and I'm sure that the officers know exactly what route to take this down, and what you're doing is the right direction. But if the members and the administration don't accept the problem, their job is twice as hard. You can't bury your head in the sand and say it doesn't exist, it doesn't matter, we don't have to be important, because it's all around us. And we've just finished dealing with COVID, and we had to throw a lot of money at that. But there's no money in the world that will deal with the impacts of climate change if we don't start doing things now. And it won't be us that feel it, it won't be Councillor Tip, won't be me, or you, no, it's him, or you, yeah. Whatever it will be our children and grandchildren. We'll see some impacts of it, but they will bear the brunt of this. And it's really important, and it's a cultural change. It's not just about what the council does, it's about what people do. It crosses the whole remit, and I'm sure I'm telling most of you what you already know, so I'm sorry to repeat it. But we as an authority need to show leadership, and we need to show that we take this seriously. And I think the officers do take it seriously, and I think they are working, despite some of the members, to do the right thing. But they need the support of the members to do the right thing. And you need to just get your head out of the sand and accept the fact climate change is a big issue, and we need to have people responsible for it. You know, and you're never going to shut me up, so you don't need to worry about that. Because I will bang on it till you do the right thing. Because the right thing is what we owe the people of the New Forest. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Wade. Councillor Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm hoping that what I've heard today underscores Councillor Wade's comments just now, in that I find very few councillors are just brushing this under the carpet, as it were, I hope. But certainly the points you make are good, and I'm pretty sure that all of the 60 councillors in New Forest District Council agree with you on those points. And certainly as far as the paper presented today, we are asked to support, if we support and agree with the scope of the work outlined in the report, and I absolutely do support and agree with it completely. I think it'll be very interesting to see over the next few years what one might term the green clash as opposed to the green flash. And that is, there are lots of lobby groups, lots of international organisations, national legislation, local legislation and policies coming through, all trying to do essentially the same thing. And we may well end up with a variety of organisations all violently agreeing with each other, but not actually quite managing to get it all sorted out because it suddenly becomes far too complex. And I think that is an issue that, well, perhaps we've seen elsewhere, and it's something that could come up. But I do accept the point, the Chief Planning Officer's point, that we should have policies to go forward so that we can bid for funds. And by not having a policy, we're dipping out, which we shouldn't be.
Are you proposing to accept the report? Because I'll second that.
I am, Councillor Glass, but I just finished first, if I may. Thank you. So my last point would be, I think we've got to be careful about what we do want to be doing, and also what we don't want. The trouble is, what we don't want, we might need. And the thought that comes to mind there is the proposal for the desalination plant in Councillor Wade's neck of the woods. Now, do we need it or do we want it? But if it's going to have to be created, where's the best place for it to be? Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's in yours.
Thank you, Councillor Gossage. Anyone else? So, members, do we agree that we should set up a workshop? Yes. Do members want to put themselves forward? Does anybody want to sit on that? Or are we doing it a different way?
Yes, our intention was to do an all-member workshop because of the significance of this. We are also proposing, and I dare to say this, but we're also proposing to try and run it as a two-part workshop, with the second part being on climate change, as set out in our Cabinet report on Local Plan Part 2. So what we're proposing at the moment, and we'll need to work through the details of this, but to have one session to deal with the green infrastructure, the second session to do a piece on climate change, which will inform an SPD and then lead into Local Plan Part 2. And we'd love all members to attend.
Thank you. So there we are. Everyone can attend this workshop. Look out for the email when it's sent round. Thank you very much. We will move on now to item 9, which is design guidance for outdoor play space. And Richard, over to you.
I'll put my microphone on. Good afternoon, members. My name is Richard Payne, team leader in environmental design as part of the planning function. You have in front of you a report on design guidance for outdoor play. Sorry, for outdoor play spaces. I just want to take you through that briefly, and then to answer any questions if there are any. Don't seem to be moving on slides. A quote that's in the guidance from the UN Convention on the Rights of a Child, which I think helps us to set the scene as to why and how important it is to get play as part of development. Sorry, I am losing. So I haven't got a button there, it's not working. Okay, it's set out in 8 sections. The purpose of the guide, the aim is to provide high quality design-led play provision as part of the home environment. That's home as opposed to just occasional visits, somewhere that a child relates to, feels sense of belonging and ownership. Play provision as an integral part of new residential layouts, with a view to encouraging a rich diversity of play opportunities. By providing a constant message, we can facilitate timely delivery and ensure quality. How much, what type, how much to meet the spatial quantity requirements that we have, to embed the concept of design-led provision as part of playable landscapes, to give us a range of provision and to deliver safe and manageable spaces in the right places. Started working now. Section 2, from page 10 to 13, the document sets out the expectations of quantity and the type of play spaces we want to deliver. and it sets out a requirement to embed play spaces as part of the landscape. So natural play, the more complex the play environment, the greater the quality of learning through play. Not an excuse to omit equipment and just scatter a few boulders and logs and mounds, which we sometimes see happen. It's to try and actually give a message as to what that means and how it's going to work. It's a complex, sensory, enjoyable landscape, looks good, inspires play in the right places. Where children play, they need to get there easily accessible for all, natural surveillance, flexibility. Section 3, the local plan seeks a certain amount per new development, depending on the size. Fields in Trust has long set a benchmark standard for play all across the country, but that's different in different places. And we hope that you agree that this document translates this into what could be an updated local standard for us. It's just one of the diagrams explaining how we're looking at the same sort of tier system as the Fields in Trust work. Three levels so that you have doorstep play area, major play area. And by doorstep playable space, we mean something that's close to. It may be almost incidental, but it must offer enough space and it must, by its design, invite play. The aim is to ensure that very young children can access a safe place for play in close proximity to the home. The play area is perhaps what we would normally expect to see as a play area, to provide well-distributed range of play areas that meet the needs of accompanied younger children, children gaining independence, but to provide all this through a combination of fixed equipped spaces that actively link to the wider environment. And then, where we can, major play area as a neighbourhood focal point includes teenagers as well, but it's a special place for a visit by any age, and a local place for older, perhaps more independent youngsters. Section 5 is about defining the play space, and for design reasons, attractiveness, inclusiveness, and the play value that we get from our landscapes, the enjoyment needs to read beyond the space. But for management purposes, we need to define what is going to be inspected, what is insured, etc. At section 6, we have materials of construction, fairly self-explanatory. We don't go into every detail simply because a lot of that is held by manufacturers and through standard design requirements. But we look particularly at activity full zones, relationships between pieces of equipment, so children aren't bumping into each other on the way to rush to the slide because the swing's cutting across them. Those sort of things that we know as designers to make sure we're clear about them. Some key things about surfacing, enclosure, ground modelling and so on that are balanced between how well we can manage them and how they can be kept in good order, as well as how they can be designed to encourage and create playable landscapes. Risk management is an important issue. We hear a lot about, that's section 7, we hear a lot about our environments being dumbed down for health and safety, but the document sets out how we can design and manage play areas to be safe from hazards without losing the very real health and child development benefits that taking a pragmatic approach to health and safety can offer. It sets out the information we require, what we need from the developer, when we need it, and how we will assess that in decision making. And we have an assessment system in the document. We advocate an assessment through a quality matrix rather than following a tick box exercise, which we know from various play manufacturers and play companies and experts that the tick box exercise doesn't get us where we need to go. But a quality matrix, and you can see it in the appendix of your document as page 48, 49, and that idea as a principle will help us to help us as a council, as decision makers, but help the developers in the way they procure what they're doing. So in conclusion, we've got a lot of major new developments offering potential for real benefits of play provision as an integral part of new residential layouts. If I can answer questions and if we have any comments, that would be useful. And if I can just thank Jill Colclough, whose tireless efforts bringing this document together have been very important. Unfortunately, she's not able to present today, so you've got me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Questions from members or comments? Yes, Councillor Tipp.
I presume that the play equipment would be funded out of developers' contributions. That's the idea of larger developments, is that right?
That's the main idea.
And it's also very important, as I know from parishes in my area who've spent a lot of money setting up playgrounds, you've then got to have somebody responsible for it because it needs to be constantly assessed to see that the equipment's not been damaged and this sort of thing. And of course, eventually, it's got to be replaced as equipment wears out and larger faults go. So, you know, you've got to have all that sort of funding in place. I know that in the parishes, where they did fundraising efforts to raise the initial playground, and they've set aside some money from their parish funding to carry out that ongoing maintenance. But it's absolutely important that somebody takes responsibility, otherwise it doesn't work.
Thank you. That's absolutely right.
Councillor Glass.
Thank you. I think this report's great. The one thing I would like is, when we as a council take over a building development, quite often it includes a play area. These play areas vary in quality. Some are excellent quality, some are scrap before you build them. The cheapest thing the builder can absolutely get hold of. Unfortunately, Fawley have been lumbered with a load of these, or a pair of these, and we've virtually had to replace them at our cost. Can we make sure that when we are taking over any developer-built play areas, they are of suitable quality, of stuff that would be approved by the council, not just back garden quality Argos stuff or whatever it is, because it is important that it can be used by kids. It can it might be aimed at 4-year-olds, but 18-year-olds will probably climb on it. So I think we've got to be very careful when we're taking over play equipment. Thank you.
Richard, would you like to come back?
Well, that's certainly the ambition of the document, as set out, saying how we need a consistent understanding of the quality that we're expecting, so the developers understand that, but also that quality in terms of the management going forward. We've had to come back a bit on some of the more flights of fancy sort of design ideas that might come forward in order to make sure they're manageable, but at the same time we're trying to set out a consistent standard by which we do have that quality of play in balance with that management. And if we can take this forward and everyone can agree, we have a consensus, then we can give it to developers and say that is what the council wants, and then we can start to have some really strong consistency. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davis, did you want to say something? No. Richard, if I could just make a couple of comments. I mean, obviously this document is still in progress. You're still adding bits into this.
Yes.
It's going to be available online, is it? Or is it going to be a paper document that will be sent to people who want to read it?
It will definitely be online, and again, one of the advantages is if we put it online, the developers really early on can access it and look at the sort of cost and build that in at a really early stage, which could be 2 or 3 years before they even start talking to us. So it will be online.
It gives them a direction of what they should be looking at.
They can cost things in at a really early stage.
And just another very small comment. I just noticed on page 3 and 5, they were the first 2 pages, you've got a panel which starts at a lighter colour and goes down to a darker colour. I don't know what that looks like online, but it makes the reading of it, certainly on page 5, quite difficult because the colour sort of rather does away with the typeface.
There's a few graphic things, yes.
No doubt you'll sort that in the...
It kind of looks better on screen, but...
Yeah.
Yes, the graphics will be sorted out. We've got 1 or 2 drawings that you can see are only draft, but yeah.
And the push, from reading this document, the push is more towards making these play areas of natural materials rather than the past plastic and metal and... Is it?
It's getting that balance right. When we talk about natural play, what we're really wanting is play that's working with the landscape, that's intrinsically part of the place, that gives children that sensory experience, the variety of experiences and things they can do. There's so much more in what we call a natural play.
Thank you. So we had a slight breakdown in communication there. Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think it's a really good report. I think play is really important for children, and the ideas and concepts you've got, I think, are really positive. But having been a parish councillor for 30 plus years, I know one of the sad sides to this is that a lot of the play equipment needs to be exceptionally durable because it is abused, and a lot of those natural materials, which are great, and I totally get where you're coming from, are probably less strong than some of the less pleasant materials that we've been used to in the past. Is there a way we can, because it's not all play areas and it's certain places, is there a way we can marry this? And forgive me, I didn't see it in the report. If I've missed it, I apologise. Is there a way we can marry these great ideas going forward with the durability that we're not fixing something every 6 months, is what I'm trying to say, or replacing it? Because sadly, it's a fact of life. We get vandalism.
Yes, it's something that obviously we've been looking at for many years and see the same sort of things you see. Play equipment there's variable durablenesses, is that a word? Getting that right, and I hope the document actually picks up on some of the key issues of qualities that are needed in the materials and construction section. Certainly things that are properly certificated will be what is required. It also comes back to what Councillor Tipp mentioned about the need to be sure that we have the management mechanism for the money in place, because all equipment, whether it's metal, whether it's very durable wood, or whether it's a landscape that actually needs to evolve, and that's another point about it, if it lasts for 30 years but all the children have moved away, you need a landscape that evolves. All of these will need some replacement and maintenance. I've heard it referred to in the same way as if you buy a new car, you might expect to replace it after 15, 20 years. You don't say you've vandalised it, you've used it. When we put play equipment in, very often, after 20 years, we think, oh, that wasn't very long, and all the wood's rotting. Well, some of it will start in some of the cheaper material, some of the cheaper equipment, but a lot of it we can get certified to make it last as long as possible, but where there is limited lifespan, it's about getting that replacement program or evolution of the thing in part of the management plan. So it's sort of answering both, I hope. You don't... Is it...
Okay, Councillor.
Just come back one quick. No, I totally get that. I understand the points you're trying to make. It's just that negative side to human nature. I think sometimes the best will in the world, you can put it in, and someone finds a way to modify it, shall we say. And that has to strike a balance between what is that which is brilliant, but what has the ability to withstand a certain amount of treatment, shall we say. You understand what I mean?
Yeah, as I say, we've got certificated equipment, but also it's about getting things in the right place, aiming them at the right ability groups of people.
Yeah.
Councillor Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to underscore Councillor Wade's point, Leamington and Pennington Town Council in the last 5 years have had to replace 2 trampolines in the Pennington Common play area at a cost of £14,000. It's just very boring that it happens. I understand that our third version has a fire retardant quality about it that the other 2 didn't. I hope it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a question from me, if I may, Richard. Where these play areas are placed, going forward, who would take on the financial responsibility of the future maintenance of them? Would it fall to the individual parish, or how would that work?
Can I maybe answer that, because that's a little outside the document and the discussion this afternoon. So in terms of future maintenance, that is a discussion with developers and a position that the council needs to take. Developers are more than happy to deal with future management and maintenance through management companies, and I've used Fawley as an example. We're now working through the Section 106 with a very, very detailed prescriptive way of managing that land in the future that will sit within a management company, with the assurances that we need as a council, that there's ongoing finance within that company, that the actual residents of that new community are shareholders within that company because they've got a vested interest in that company succeeding. So Fawley is an example of that. So that's a sort of an ongoing discussion in the life of applications. I think members, sort of the other strategic site we've had to date that's come through planning committee is part of the Fording Bridge, the Metis Homes. They are wanting to set up a management company to manage the open space, the play provision and the unadopted highways in that way for their future residents.
So nicely tied up. Thank you. Any more comments? No. So the panel, we need to consider whether we feel there is merit in a task and finish group or whether we are happy with the way things are going along. Councillor Glass.
I think the way things are going on looks very satisfactory at the moment, because obviously people are going to have to liaise with the relevant parishes and developers. So I think a task and finish group might slow things down more than it actually helps out. I propose we leave it as it's going.
Panel members all happy with that? We don't feel there's a need to form a task and finish group on this item. Okay, thank you. Next agenda item, number 10. Process for joint strategy for South Hampshire. Mark. Mark's not here.
Mark's not here, so I'm going to cover it.
Thank you, Louise.
I think it should say progress rather than process.
Sorry, did I say process?
No, you read what it says on the agenda, but I think we're actually talking about the progress. Anyway, it is a while since officers had reported to panel on the progress that is being made, working as part of the Partnership for South Hampshire, looking at developing a sub-regional development strategy for the area that covers us in the west right through to Portsmouth and Havant in the east of southern Hampshire. We're signed up to a statement of common ground to work with the South Hampshire authorities in coming up with a joint planning strategy for the area. Work is progressing. Mostly background technical work has been progressing over the last year or so to establish an evidence base which will provide the information necessary for us jointly to work to draw up a planning strategy or spatial position statement covering the area. This has happened before. The previous one was agreed in 2016, but that now needs to be reviewed and updated, and that is the reason for progressing the work now. It's looking to a period up to 2036, which of course our own adopted local plan already sets a planning strategy for our area during that period. But since we prepared our local plan, the government has changed its standard methodology for calculating how much housing should be developed in various areas. And I think it's fair to say, with the government's target of building 300,000 new homes in England per annum, the methodology now adopted very much seeks to increase housing targets across all areas, and certainly potentially would have an impact on the scale of development in our own area. But we're working with the other Southern Hampshire authorities to actually look at what would be an appropriate spatial distribution for new housing and other developments across Southern Hampshire. So the technical work that has been done over the last year or so, it might be longer, it probably is a bit longer, and a lot of this work is being undertaken by specialist consultants that are being employed by the partnership. So they have looked for potential areas for strategic housing development. The work has consisted of appraising all potential development opportunity areas in Southern Hampshire and subjecting them to a rigorous environmental and sustainability appraisal to see which areas would be the most appropriate as potential development areas. There is transport modelling work going on that is continuing at the moment, but actually looking at the impact on the transportation network of development in particular areas, and also looking at how the impact on infrastructure is affected by the locational choices to actually minimise the environmental impacts that would result. There has been some very detailed work done on economic, employment and commercial needs in the area. That work has been completed and actually can be looked at on the Partnership South Hampshire website. There was a paper taken to the Joint Committee earlier this year, and the study has been published, reveals some very interesting information about future employment needs and quite strongly challenges previous studies that were only done some 5 years ago. Things have changed quite significantly in that 5 years about employment needs in the area. And the fourth major bit of work that's currently being undertaken is a green infrastructure, again, and green belt study. And in particular, there has been a desire from the partnership authorities to look at the possibility of introducing a new green belt in South Hampshire in association with the plans for strategic growth. Obviously, New Forest District already has green belt in part of our planning area, but no other Hampshire district has. So there is a study underway to look at the benefits or not of green belt and the practicalities of actually trying to establish a new green belt in southern Hampshire. So what's happening at the moment is establishing that evidence base which will be needed to start drawing up a strategy for consideration by the authorities that form the partnership. We don't expect there to be even early drafts of this planning strategy for the area till late in 2021. So I've got nothing to share with you at the moment, but work is continuing. It's going to be very significant for a lot of the South Hampshire districts, and your officers are particularly involved, and Claire in particular, who chairs the planning officers group, looking at this work in detail. There's a lot of work being undertaken, and when there is something of significance to report to you, we will certainly be reporting to you and updating you on how things are taking shape. But we just wanted to update you today and reassure you that we might have been silent on the subject, but there is actually a lot of work being undertaken at the moment. And unless Claire has something to add?
No, Louise, I think you've covered it perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Any panel members wish to comment or a question? Yes, Councillor Gossage.
Madam Chair, thank you. Very interesting to hear that, and in particular in relation to the OSB yesterday housing, which I attended, and sort of kind of tying the two together. And I just feel that New Forest District Council and the MPA sit in such a unique situation in South Hampshire, although I'm not quite sure what else there is in South Hampshire apart from the MPA and New Forest District Council. Does it go that far north? I'm not sure. But we do have quite a unique circumstance, and I do worry that if it's not urban and built on already, or designated green belt, or MPA, there isn't really anywhere else left to achieve our share of the target of 300,000 houses per year, if that's a government target. But I was very interested to hear yesterday, and I think I'd just like to share this with this panel, that the First Homes initiative is something that I think we would welcome tremendously in our area specifically, especially because the price of, in quotes, affordable homes, which there is a mandate for, I believe, developments of over 100 houses. The First Homes, that would be an allocation, I think, Chief Planning Officer, correct me if I get it wrong, but 25% of the affordable homes to be built on a development would be First Homes, and there would be a price cap of £250,000 on a first home, with a discount of up to 30%. And there would be apparently the potential to impose a local connection requirement on a purchaser. And the price would, that discounted price would also be imposed on the first home owner when they sell it on to the next first home owner, as they then hopefully climb the ladder. So tying in what we've just heard, and thank you very much for that, with what I learnt yesterday in the housing OSP, makes me think that's good news. We're heading in the right direction, but we have some difficulties. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to add to that, Claire?
No, but I think you've hit the nail on the head of why we work with our partners to identify how we distribute housing across a wider economic area.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Gossage. Anyone else? No. So our last item is item 11, the work programme. And Karen, I'll just hand over to you because you've got some additions to tell us about.
Yep, I've got 2 additional items for September. I've got the review of Section 106 transport contributions and also coastal protection overview, which will be some kind of presentation, I think.
Both for the September, the next one on the 9th
Both
of
for
September.
September, yes.
That's lovely. Thank you. If you'll make note of that. Well, we've come to the end of the meeting, panel members. But just before we do close the meeting, I would just like to say a few words to Colin, because this is the last time we will have Colin at our panel meetings, and probably Colin is leaving the council very shortly. And I just wanted to say, for me, how really sorry I am that you're leaving the council. When I first became a councillor, we were given buddies, if you remember, new councillors were given buddies, and Colin was my buddy. And he was somebody I could ask questions of when I wasn't sure where I was going and if I needed help on something. And I've really appreciated that over the years. And whenever, certainly for me, whenever I've sent you an email saying, who do I speak to on this? You've always replied, and there's always been an answer. And I think the council will really, really miss you. I know you're going on to nicer things. You're going to have a nice, quieter life and enjoy life a little bit more. But I just wanted to say that we will really miss you. And I hope that when this COVID thing sort of lets us alone for a bit, that we could have a proper meeting where we could say goodbye to you properly. And I invite other councillors if they wish to say something. Yes, Councillor Wade.
Chairman, I will echo all your points. I've known Colin for a long, long time. And I remember first meeting him when we went to look at cemetery down in Fawley Way. Remember? Council, that way. That was it, Blackfield. So yeah, and I've found Colin to be very professional, exceedingly helpful. And I'm wishing all the best for the future, and he will be a big loss. His retirement is this council. His retirement's gain is this council's loss.
Yes.
But I wish you all the best.
Absolutely.
Hear, hear.
Yes.
It's been a great pleasure working. I came here for 2 years, in 2003, and that was the plan. Come to New Forest for 2 years and move on. And I stayed, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. We've done some wonderful things. We've brought curbside glass collections, garden waste collections. You know, we've had storm damage on the seafront you can't not to dream about, but actually it's been really challenging and really enjoyable. And I've really enjoyed this panel especially, and working with the members, the various chairmen over the years. You know, going back to their days, Paul Woods, Christine Ford, you know, all the people there that have been involved. And it's been really, really nice working with members that have given us the support to make some really good changes. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. And with that, members, I close the meeting, and just thank you for being so kind to me, sitting up here for the first time.